Picture this. I'm standing in the middle of a packed airplane aisle, holding my crying 2-year-old daughter Emma, while a 50-something woman with perfectly coiffed blonde hair is literally screaming at a flight attendant. But here's the kicker: she's pointing at me, demanding that I be removed from the flight. Voice drops to a whisper. And the reason? Because I had just exposed her for trying to steal my window seat with a fake boarding pass. But that wasn't even the worst part of what this woman, let's call her Karen, had put my family through that day. Pause for effect. Because 30 minutes earlier, this same woman had complained so loudly about my toddler's stroller that she got the gate agent to force me to gate check it. She thought she'd won. She thought she'd humiliated me in front of everyone. Slight smile. She had no idea what was coming. Beat. Let me start from the beginning. Now, I need you to understand something about me. I'm not the confrontational type. Never have been. I'm a 34-year-old working mom from suburban Phoenix, and honestly, I just want to get through life without drama. My husband Mark always jokes that I apologize to automatic doors when they don't open fast enough. But this particular Tuesday in March was already testing my limits. I was flying solo from Phoenix to Denver with Emma, my beautiful, energetic, and yes, occasionally loud 2-year-old, to visit my parents. My dad had been in the hospital with pneumonia, and mom needed help. Mark couldn't get time off work, so it was just me and Emma on what I hoped would be a smooth 2-hour flight. Rueful laugh. Famous last words, right? I'd been dreading this trip for weeks. Any parent who's traveled alone with a toddler knows that sinking feeling in your stomach. You're already exhausted before you even leave the house. You're carrying what feels like half your home in diaper bags and carry-ons. And you're just praying that your kid doesn't have a meltdown at 30,000 feet. The morning started rough. Emma had refused to eat breakfast, insisting that her stuffed elephant, Mr. Peanuts, needed to eat first. Then she'd had a diaper blowout right before we left for the airport. By the time we got to Sky Harbor Airport, I was already feeling frazzled, my back was aching from carrying all our stuff, and Emma was getting cranky from being off her routine. But I had everything planned out perfectly. I'd paid extra for priority boarding so we could get settled without holding up the line. I'd bought Emma her own seat 14A, window, because I knew she loved looking at clouds. I had snacks, activities, her favorite blanket. I even brought her lightweight umbrella stroller because the Denver airport is massive, and carrying a tired toddler through those long concourses would have been impossible. Pause. Emotional shift. What I didn't plan for was Karen. Beat. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me paint you the picture of how this all started. We arrived at gate B12 about an hour before our flight. Emma was actually in a good mood, babbling to Mr. Peanuts and pointing at the airplanes through the big windows. I was feeling cautiously optimistic. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. I found us seats near the gate and set up our little area. Emma's stroller was folded up beside me, one of those compact Chico models that's perfect for travel. Not huge, not in anyone's way, just sitting there minding its own business. That's when I first noticed her. She was sitting directly across from us, and she was, how do I put this nicely? She was staring, not just glancing over, full on, unblinking, staring at Emma and me. She was probably in her early 50s, wearing an expensive-looking cream-colored blazer, perfectly applied makeup, and her blonde hair was styled in that helmet-like way that screams, "I need to speak to your manager." At first, I tried to ignore it. Maybe she was just one of those people who loves babies. Some older women get all nostalgic when they see toddlers. But then Emma dropped her sippy cup, and it rolled toward this woman's designer handbag. Voice becomes more dramatic. The look she gave my daughter, I will never forget it. It was pure disgust, like Emma was some kind of pest that had invaded her personal space. I quickly got up to retrieve the cup, apologizing as I grabbed it. "Sorry about that," I said with what I hoped was a friendly smile. The woman didn't smile back. Instead, she looked me up and down, and I mean literally up and down, like she was taking inventory, and said in this clipped, condescending tone, "You might want to keep better control of your belongings." Your belongings. Not your daughter or your little one. Belongings. Pause for effect. I felt my cheeks burn, but I just nodded and went back to my seat. I told myself she was probably just having a bad day. We've all been there, right? Sometimes travel stress makes people a little snappy. Voice drops ominously. But that was just the beginning. For the next 45 minutes, this woman watched our every move like a hawk. When Emma laughed at something on her tablet, the woman huffed audibly. When Emma asked me in her normal 2-year-old voice if we were going to see Grandpa, the woman actually shushed her. Shushed her. A 2-year-old. In a busy airport gate area. I was starting to feel that familiar knot in my stomach. You know, the one, that anxiety that builds when you realize someone has decided to make you their problem for the day. Beat. But I had no idea how much worse it was about to get. When they called for pre-boarding for families with small children, I gathered our things and got Emma situated in her stroller for the walk down the jetway. She was excited, pointing and saying airplane, airplane, in that sing-song voice that usually makes people smile. Not Karen, though. As I stood up and unfolded the stroller, I heard her make this disgusted noise. Like, loud enough for me to hear, but quiet enough that she could pretend it wasn't directed at us. I was buckling Emma into her stroller when I heard Karen talking to the gate agent. At first, I wasn't really paying attention. I was focused on making sure Emma's little backpack was secure and that I had our boarding passes ready. But then I heard my daughter's name. Voice becomes sharp with indignation. That child has been disruptive this entire time, Karen was saying, her voice carrying across the gate area. And now they're bringing that enormous stroller onto the plane? That can't be safe. What if there's an emergency evacuation? I froze. Enormous stroller? It was a compact travel stroller, the kind specifically designed for airplanes. And disruptive? Emma had been sitting quietly, watching her tablet and drinking her juice. The gate agent, a young guy named Marcus who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, glanced over at us uncertainly. Ma'am, the stroller appears to be within regulation size. I fly constantly for business, Karen interrupted, and I could hear that self-important tone that immediately made my jaw clench. I know what's allowed and what isn't. That stroller is clearly oversized, and that child has been crying and screaming. Voice rises with emotion. Emma hadn't cried once. Not once. She'd been an absolute angel. But Marcus was new. I could tell by how flustered he looked. And Karen had that authoritative, "I'm going to make your life hell if you don't do what I want" energy that unfortunately works on a lot of people in customer service. Maybe we could gate check the stroller? Marcus suggested, looking at me apologetically. Just to be safe? Pause for dramatic effect. Now, here's what you need to understand. Gate checking Emma's stroller wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a disaster. The Denver airport is huge, and my parents were picking us up at the far end of the terminal. Without the stroller, I'd have to carry Emma, her car seat, our carry-on bags, and her diaper bag through what could be a mile of airport. Plus, gate-checked items get beat up. This stroller was expensive, and we needed it for the whole trip. But I was trapped. I had a plane to catch, a cranky toddler, and now a gate agent who was being pressured by this woman to solve a problem that didn't exist. Voice becomes resigned. Okay, I said quietly. I guess I can gate check it. Karen smiled. Actually smiled, like she'd won some kind of victory. Beat. But that smile? It was about to be wiped right off her face. As I was filling out the gate check tag, trying to balance everything while keeping Emma happy, I heard Karen talking to another passenger, a middle-aged man in a business suit. Some people just don't know how to travel appropriately, she was saying, just loud enough for me to hear. They bring their whole household and expect everyone else to accommodate them. My hands were shaking as I wrote our information on the tag. Not from anger, from embarrassment. Because other passengers were starting to look. And when you're a single mom with a toddler, you already feel like you're being judged for every little thing. But then Emma, sweet little Emma, looked up at me with those big brown eyes and said, "Mama sad?" Voice becomes emotional. And something inside me just broke. Not in a bad way. In a clarity way. This woman was bullying me, and worse, she was doing it in front of my daughter. She was teaching Emma that it was okay for strangers to be cruel to her family. I took a deep breath, looked at Marcus, the gate agent, and said in my most polite voice, "Actually, could you measure the stroller? I'd like to confirm that it's actually oversized before I gate check it." Marcus looked relieved. Of course. Let me grab the measuring device. Pause for effect. Karen's face went white. Because here's the thing, she knew she was lying. She just thought I was too intimidated to challenge her. Marcus measured the stroller carefully, checking it against the regulation size requirements posted right there at the gate. Length, width, height. It's actually well within the size limits, he announced, loud enough for the whole gate area to hear. "You're good to take it on board." The look on Karen's face was priceless. Pure, undiluted rage. She'd expected me to just roll over and accept her bullying, and instead, she'd been publicly proven wrong. But instead of backing down or apologizing, she doubled down. "That's impossible," she snapped at Marcus. "You must have measured it wrong. I demand to speak to your supervisor." Marcus, bless his heart, had clearly reached his limit. "Ma'am, I've measured it twice. The stroller meets all requirements. Now, we need to begin boarding." Beat. That's when Karen made her fatal mistake. She turned to me, and in a voice loud enough for half the gate area to hear, she said, "I don't know why they let people like you fly anymore. Some of us actually pay full price for our tickets." Long pause. People like me. Let that sink in for a second. The entire gate area went quiet. Even Emma stopped babbling and looked around, sensing the tension. Voice becomes deadly calm. And that's when I realized that this woman hadn't just insulted me, she'd insulted every parent, every family, every person who didn't fit her narrow definition of appropriate travelers. She thought she was better than us. She thought her comfort was more important than basic human decency. Beat. She was about to learn otherwise. As we lined up for boarding, I thought the drama was over. Karen had been publicly corrected about the stroller. Marcus was clearly on my side now, and Emma was happily pointing at the airplane through the window. I should have known better. I was in the priority boarding group. I'd paid extra for it specifically so Emma and I could get settled without rushing. As Marcus scanned our boarding passes, Emma waved at him and said thank you. In that sweet little voice that usually melts people. Marcus grinned and said, "You're very welcome, sweetheart. Have a great flight." We started walking down the jetway, Emma chattering excitedly about seeing Grandpa. I was finally starting to relax. We'd made it through the gate drama, we were about to board, and Emma was being an absolute angel. That's when I heard Karen behind us. Excuse me. I turned around, and she was power walking down the jetway toward us, waving her boarding pass in the air like some kind of weapon. "There's been a mistake," she announced, loud enough that other passengers started turning to look. "I have seat 14A. That woman," she pointed directly at me, "is trying to steal my seat. 14A, Emma's window seat. The seat I'd specifically purchased, specifically chosen, specifically paid extra for so my daughter could look out the window during her first flight in months." Marcus had followed us down the jetway, looking increasingly frustrated. "Ma'am, I just scanned their boarding passes. They're in the correct seats." Karen thrust her boarding pass at him. "Check again. I always book window seats. I have a fear of flying, and I need the window seat to manage my anxiety. Now, let me pause here for a second. I'm a compassionate person. If someone genuinely has anxiety and needs a specific seat for medical reasons, I'm usually willing to help." Emma would have been fine in the middle seat. But something about Karen's tone, something about the way she was performing this whole scene, made me look more closely at her boarding pass. And that's when I saw it. The boarding pass she was waving around? It was for a completely different flight. Not just a different time, a different airline. A different destination. A different day. Pause for maximum effect. This woman was trying to steal our seats with a boarding pass from Southwest Airlines. We were flying American. Now I want you to understand something about me. I've spent my entire adult life avoiding confrontation. I'm the person who says sorry when someone else bumps into me. I've returned cold food to restaurants rather than complain to the server. But standing there in that jetway, holding my confused 2-year-old while this woman tried to scam us out of our seats with a fake boarding pass. Something inside me just snapped. Not in an angry way. In a clear, focused, absolutely not way. I looked at Marcus and said, in my calmest, most reasonable voice, "Could you check the details on her boarding pass? Because I think there might be some confusion." Karen immediately got defensive. "There's no confusion. I know where I'm supposed to sit." But Marcus was already examining her boarding pass more closely. His eyebrows went up, then his eyes widened. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "this boarding pass is for Southwest Flight 447 to Las Vegas. Yesterday." Long pause for effect. The jetway went dead silent. Even Emma stopped chattering and looked around at all the adults staring at each other. Karen's face went through about 5 different expressions in 2 seconds. Confusion, realization, panic, defiance, and finally, rage. That's impossible, she sputtered. You people don't know how to read boarding passes properly. I demand to speak to the captain. But Marcus wasn't having it anymore. Ma'am, you attempted to board the wrong flight with an expired boarding pass from a different airline. I need to see your valid ticket for this flight. Voice becomes almost gleeful. Here's where it gets really good. Karen started digging through her purse frantically, pulling out papers and muttering under her breath. Other passengers were backing up behind us, craning their necks to see what was happening. After about 30 seconds of increasingly frantic searching, Karen looked up with pure panic in her eyes. I must have left my real boarding pass at the gate, she said weakly. Marcus shook his head. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come back to the gate with me to verify your ticket. That's when Karen made her final, desperate play. She turned to the other passengers and started talking to them like they were her allies. This is ridiculous. They're treating me like a criminal just because I made a simple mistake. And all because she, pointing at me again, complained about me asking for my seat. A businessman behind us cleared his throat. Lady, you tried to take their seats with a fake boarding pass. That's not a simple mistake. An older woman added, and you were incredibly rude to that young mother and her baby at the gate. Suddenly, everyone who had witnessed Karen's behavior was speaking up. The complaints about Emma, the lies about the stroller, the nasty comments about people like me. Karen realized she'd lost the crowd. And that's when she made her biggest mistake yet. She pointed at Emma and shouted, all of this is because of that brat and her oversized stroller. She called my daughter a brat. And that's when I decided that Karen was going to learn a very important lesson about consequences. As Marcus escorted Karen back up the jetway to verify her actual ticket situation, I stood there for a moment, Emma babbling happily in her stroller, completely unaware of the drama that had just unfolded around her. But I was very aware. And I was thinking, see, here's the thing about people like Karen. They rely on others being too polite, too intimidated, or too tired to fight back. She'd spent the entire morning bullying me because she thought I'd just take it. She'd tried to steal our seats because she assumed I wouldn't have the courage to challenge her. She was used to winning through sheer aggression and entitlement. But she'd made one crucial miscalculation. She'd assumed I was helpless. As we finally boarded the plane and found our seats are actual, legitimate seats that we'd paid for, I started thinking about that stroller. The stroller that Karen had forced me to gate check with her lies and manipulation. Emma was settled in 14A, her little face pressed to the window, when a flight attendant came by to check on us. Is this your first time flying together? She asked kindly. No, but it's been a while, I replied. We had to gate check her stroller because of a misunderstanding. At the gate, the flight attendant, her name tag said Diana, lowered her voice. Were you the family that had trouble with the woman who tried to board with the wrong ticket? Word travels fast on planes, apparently. That's us, I said with a tired smile. Diana shook her head sympathetically. I'm so sorry you had to deal with that. Some people just. She trailed off diplomatically. Where is she sitting now? I asked, genuinely curious. Diana glanced around, then leaned closer. She's in 23B middle seat, all the way in the back. Her actual ticket was for a later flight, but she convinced the gate agent to put her on standby for this one. 23B middle seat. The absolute worst seat on the plane. And that's when inspiration struck. Diana, I said sweetly, when we land, could you help me with something? It's about the stroller I had to gate check. The flight itself was blissfully uneventful. Emma was perfect. She napped, played quietly with her toys, and spent a good hour just staring out the window at the clouds. Several passengers complimented me on how well behaved she was. Karen, meanwhile, was clearly miserable in her middle seat at the back of the plane. Every time I walked past her row to take Emma to the bathroom, she looked like she was sucking on a lemon. The businessman on one side of her was working on his laptop with his elbows spread wide, and the woman on the other side had a persistent cough. Karma was already starting to work its magic. But I wasn't done. During the flight, I'd had plenty of time to think about what Karen had put us through. The humiliation at the gate. The lies about Emma being disruptive. The attempt to steal our seats. The nasty comments about people like me. And calling my daughter a brat. That was the part one couldn't let go. As we started our descent into Denver, Diana came by to check on us one more time. How did your little one do? She asked. Diana smiled. She certainly has. Now, about that stroller situation, I spoke with the ground crew. They're going to handle the delivery exactly as you requested. As we taxied to the gate, I could see Karen 3 rows behind us, craning her neck to see out the window, clearly anxious to get off the plane. She kept checking her watch and muttering to herself. When the seatbelt sign turned off, there was the usual rush of passengers standing up and grabbing their carry-on bags. Karen was one of the first people in the aisle, pushing past other passengers like she was escaping a burning building. Excuse me, I have a connection to make," she kept saying, even though I knew from overhearing her earlier phone call that she was ending her trip in Denver. She was just desperate to get away from the scene of her humiliation. Little did she know, her humiliation was just getting started. As we deplaned, Emma and I took our time. There was no rush. My parents weren't expecting us for another hour, and honestly, I wanted to stick around for the show. "It's all arranged," she said with a conspiratorial smile. "The ground crew is going to deliver the stroller parts to her seat location, just like you requested." They thought it was creative justice. Now, let me explain what I'd arranged during the flight. See, when you gate check a stroller, it goes into the cargo hold in one piece. But there's nothing stopping you from requesting that it be disassembled for easier transport, especially if you claim you need to fit it into a smaller vehicle or carry it upstairs. And there's nothing stopping you from requesting that those disassembled parts be delivered to a specific seat number instead of the usual gate pickup. Voice becomes more animated. So Karen was about to receive the wheels, frame, fabric seat, canopy, and various bolts and screws of Emma's stroller in about 15 separate pieces delivered directly to row 23, seat B. As we entered the terminal, I could see the ground crew guys with their cart, heading toward the gate. One of them grinned and gave me a thumbs up. Emma and I found a spot at a nearby coffee shop where we could watch the gate area. My parents weren't picking us up for a while anyway, so we had time to see how this played out. Beat. About 10 minutes later, Karen came storming back toward the gate, clearly looking for someone to yell at about something. She'd probably discovered some other injustice that required immediate management attention. That's when she saw the ground crew guys at her former seat, carefully laying out stroller parts in a neat little display. Voice drops to a whisper. The look on her face when she realized what she was seeing. "I wish I had a camera." She marched over to the crew. "What is this? Why are you putting baby gear on the seats?" One of the ground crew guys, bless his heart, played it completely straight. "Ma'am, we have a delivery of gate-checked stroller components for row 23, seat B. The passenger requested that the stroller be disassembled for easier transport and delivered to this specific location." Karen looked around wildly. But I was sitting in 23B. "Are you claiming these stroller parts, ma'am?" Pause for maximum effect. "No, I don't want someone else's baby stroller. Why would you bring it here?" The ground crew guy consulted his paperwork with exaggerated thoroughness. "Well, ma'am, the delivery request specifically mentioned that this was for the passenger in 23B who had complained about stroller size regulations. The note here says, please deliver in pieces so the recipient can verify that each component meets individual size requirements." Voice becomes triumphant. Karen's face went through every shade of red in the crayon box. She realized exactly what had happened. She knew this was payback for her behavior. But she couldn't do anything about it without admitting that she was the passenger who had complained. "This is ridiculous," she sputtered. "I'm not taking someone else's stroller parts." "No problem, ma'am, but they were specifically requested to be delivered to your seat location. If you don't want them, we'll need you to sign a refusal form, and then we'll need to make an announcement asking for the owner of the stroller to come claim their disassembled property." The thought of a public announcement connecting her to the stroller incident was clearly Karen's worst nightmare. She stood there for a full 30 seconds, opening and closing her mouth like a fish, while other passengers walked by and stared at her standing next to a pile of Toddler stroller parts. Finally, she grabbed her bags and stormed off toward the exit, leaving the stroller pieces exactly where they were. And that's when I walked over to collect Emma's stroller. As I reassembled Emma's stroller right there at the gate. It actually goes together pretty easily when you know what you're doing. Several passengers from our flight stopped to check on us. The businessman who had spoken up during the boarding drama shook his head and said, "That woman was completely out of line. Your daughter was an angel the whole flight." The older woman who had also witnessed Karen's behavior smiled at Emma and said, "Some people have forgotten how to treat others with kindness, dear." But you handled that beautifully. Even Marcus, the gate agent, came over during his break to apologize for the earlier confusion and to tell Emma she was one of the best young passengers he'd ever seen. As I watched Emma toddle around with her stroller, completely oblivious to the drama that had swirled around her all day, I realized something important. This wasn't really about revenge, though I'll admit the stroller delivery was pretty satisfying. It was about standing up for ourselves. For showing Emma that we don't have to accept being treated poorly just because someone else is having a bad day or thinks they're more important than we are. You see, Karen made a fundamental mistake. She assumed that because I was a young mom traveling alone with a toddler, I was vulnerable. She thought she could bully me, lie about my daughter, steal our seats, and face no consequences. She forgot that mothers are actually some of the strongest people in the world. We might choose our battles carefully, but when someone threatens our children's comfort, safety, or dignity, well, we can get pretty creative. When my parents picked us up at the airport, my dad, who was feeling much better, by the way, asked why I looked so satisfied. Just a good reminder that standing up for yourself usually works out in the end, I told him. Emma, who had been quiet during the car ride, suddenly piped up from her car seat, "Mama brave." And you know what? She was right. Sometimes being brave doesn't mean doing something dramatic or heroic. Sometimes it just means refusing to let someone treat you badly. Sometimes it means asking for the stroller to be measured. Sometimes it means checking someone's boarding pass. Sometimes it means getting a little creative with your revenge. We never saw Karen again, of course. But I hope that wherever she is, she's learned something about treating fellow travelers with basic human decency. I hope she's learned that parents traveling with children are doing their best in difficult circumstances and deserve patience, not judgment. And I hope she's learned that underestimating a protective mother is always a mistake. Because at the end of the day, we all deserve to travel with dignity. We all deserve to be treated with respect. And we all deserve to stand up for ourselves when someone tries to take that away from us. Even if it means delivering a stroller in 15 pieces to prove a point. Especially if it means that now you might think that's where the story ends. Karen storms off, I get my stroller back, and we all live happily ever after. But here's the thing about people like Karen: they don't just disappear into the sunset. They leave a trail of chaos wherever they go. And sometimes, that chaos comes back to bite them in ways they never expected. 3 days into our visit with my parents in Denver, I was scrolling through Facebook when I saw something that made me nearly spit out my coffee. My friend Jessica had shared a post from a local travel blog called Mile High Travel Fails. The headline read, "Passenger attempts to board wrong flight with expired ticket, claims discrimination when caught." Apparently, after Karen left the gate that day, she didn't just disappear quietly. Oh no, she went straight to customer service and filed a formal complaint against American Airlines, claiming that she'd been discriminated against because of her age and that the gate agents had conspired with other passengers to humiliate her. But here's where it gets really good. The travel blog had gotten hold of security footage from the gate area. Not the actual footage, they can't show that for privacy reasons, but they'd spoken to witnesses, including Marcus, the gate agent, who was more than happy to tell his side of the story. The blog post detailed everything. Karen's complaints about Emma, the lies about the stroller size, the fake boarding pass incident, even her final meltdown when she found the stroller parts at her seat. But that wasn't even the best part. Turns out, this wasn't Karen's first rodeo. The blog had done some digging, and they'd found a pattern. Over the past 2 years, Karen had filed complaints with 5 different airlines, always claiming discrimination, always demanding compensation, and always targeting families with young children. She was a serial travel bully. The blog post went viral locally. Within 24 hours, it had been shared over 3,000 times. And then something beautiful started happening. Other passengers started coming forward with their own Karen stories. A military wife named Sarah shared how Karen had harassed her when her baby cried during turbulence on a flight from Denver to San Antonio, demanding that she control her brat and threatening to have them removed from the plane. A single dad named Mike told about how Karen had tried to get his 7-year-old son moved to a different seat because the boy was fidgeting too much even though the kid was just coloring quietly in an activity book. An elderly couple, the Johnsons, described how Karen had berated them for taking too long to get their carry-on bags from the overhead compartment, even though Mr. Johnson was recovering from hip surgery and moving slowly for medical reasons. But the story that really got to me was from a young woman named Ashley. She was flying home for her grandmother's funeral with her 3-year-old daughter when Karen, yes, the same Karen, had complained so loudly about the little girl having a small snack that the flight attendant asked Ashley to put the crackers away to keep the peace. Ashley had been grieving, exhausted, and trying to keep her daughter calm during an incredibly difficult time. And Karen had made it worse just because she could. Reading these stories, I realized that what happened to Emma and me wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern of someone who had made it her mission to make air travel miserable for families, elderly passengers, and anyone she perceived as lesser than her. And she'd been getting away with it because most people like me, initially, are too polite, too tired, or too overwhelmed to fight back. But not anymore. The travel blog post had exposed her behavior to the entire Denver travel community. Flight attendants were sharing it in their crew groups. Gate agents were forwarding it to their supervisors. Even some pilots had seen it and were commenting about the importance of maintaining civility at 30,000 feet. Karen had become infamous in all the worst ways. On our last day in Denver, my parents wanted to take Emma to the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. It's this amazing place with dinosaur exhibits and an IMAX theater perfect for an energetic 2-year-old who loves learning about big scary dinosaurs. We were walking through the main hall when Emma suddenly stopped and pointed toward the museum's CAF. "Mama, mean airplane lady." I looked in the direction she was pointing, and sure enough, there was Karen. She was sitting alone at a small table, hunched over her phone, looking absolutely miserable. My first instinct was to turn around and go the other way. The last thing I wanted was another confrontation, especially in front of Emma and my parents, who still didn't know the full story of what had happened on the plane. But then I noticed something. Karen looked different, not just miserable, but genuinely upset. She was wiping her eyes with a napkin, and her usually perfect hair and makeup looked disheveled. Now, I want to be clear about something. I'm not proud of what I did next. But I was curious, and honestly, part of me wanted to see if she would recognize us and maybe, just maybe, offer some kind of apology. I told my parents to take Emma to look at the T-Rex skeleton while I grabbed us some coffee. Then I walked over toward the CAF, pretending to study the menu posted near Karen's table. She was on the phone, and she was crying. "Mom, I don't know what to do," she was saying. "They're saying I can't fly with them anymore. 23 years I've been with that airline, and now they're putting me on some kind of watch list." I realized she was talking about the complaints, the pattern of behavior that the travel blog had exposed. The airlines had connected the dots and apparently decided that Karen was more trouble than she was worth as a customer. "I know I sometimes get frustrated when I travel," she continued, "but I'm not a bad person. I expect people to follow the rules. I expect parents to control their children. I expect to be treated with respect." And that's when it hit me. Karen genuinely believed she was the victim in all of this. She couldn't see that her behavior was the problem. In her mind, she was just a concerned passenger trying to maintain order and civility, and everyone else was the problem. She truly didn't understand that demanding respect while refusing to give it doesn't work. I stood there for a moment, listening to Karen's phone conversation, and I felt something I didn't expect: pity. Not because she was facing consequences for her actions, she absolutely deserved that. But because she was so completely unable to see her own role in creating the situations that made her miserable. That's when she looked up and saw me. For a second, neither of us said anything. I could see the recognition dawn in her eyes, followed quickly by panic, then defiance. "Are you following me?" she demanded, loud enough that other CAF patrons turned to look. "No," I said calmly. "I'm here with my family visiting the museum. Same as you, I assume." She studied my face, probably trying to figure out if I was telling the truth. Then her expression changed to something almost hopeful. "Look," she said, lowering her voice, "about what happened on the plane. I think there were some misunderstandings. Maybe we could." She paused, clearly struggling with what to say next. And that's when I realized she was about to ask me to help her. To somehow undo the consequences she was facing. To maybe contact the airline or the travel blog and tell them it was all a big misunderstanding. She wanted me to save her from the results of her own actions. "Maybe we could what?" I asked, genuinely curious to see how far she would go. "Maybe you could help me clear this up," she said, her voice becoming more desperate. Tell them that it wasn't as bad as it looked. That you weren't really upset about the stroller thing. That your daughter wasn't actually bothered by my comments. I looked at this woman who had spent an entire day trying to humiliate my family, who had called my daughter a brat, who had tried to steal our seats with a fake boarding pass, and who was now asking me to lie to protect her from the consequences of her choices. And you know what I said? Karen, my daughter is 2 years old. She doesn't understand why strangers are mean to her. But she's learning from watching how adults treat each other. What you did that day wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a choice. And choices have consequences. I turned to walk away, then paused and looked back. I hope you learn something from this. Not just about how to treat other passengers, but about how to treat people in general. Because everyone deserves basic kindness, especially when they're just trying to travel with their family. And then I walked away to rejoin my parents and Emma at the dinosaur exhibit. As we drove to the airport for our flight home the next day, I found myself thinking about that encounter with Karen at the museum. Emma was napping in her car seat, clutching Mr. Peanuts, completely oblivious to the adult drama that had swirled around her during our trip. My dad, who had finally heard the full story from my mom, shook his head and said, "Some people never learn, do they?" But I wasn't so sure about that. Because in that moment at the CAF, when Karen was crying on the phone with her mother, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Not just entitlement and anger, but genuine confusion about why her world was falling apart. Don't get me wrong, I'm not excusing her behavior. What she did to us and to all those other families was wrong. Period. But I think Karen represents something bigger than just one difficult passenger. She represents a mindset that's become too common in our world. The idea that your comfort, your preferences, your convenience should always come first. The belief that being loud and demanding will get you what you want. The assumption that service workers and fellow customers exist to make your life easier, regardless of how it affects them. And here's what I've learned from this whole experience: that mindset only works if the rest of us let it work. Karen had been successful for years because most people, including me, initially would rather avoid conflict than stand up to bullying. She counted on our politeness. She counted on our desire to keep the peace. She counted on us being too tired, too overwhelmed, or too intimidated to call her out. But when we finally did call her out, when Marcus measured the stroller, when I checked her boarding pass, when witnesses spoke up, when the travel blog exposed her pattern of behavior, her whole system collapsed. Because bullies, even adult bullies in business suits, are usually cowards at heart. They pick on people they think won't fight back. And when someone finally does fight back, they don't know what to do. Our flight home was completely uneventful, by the way. Emma was again a perfect little traveler. She waved goodbye to our gate agent, a lovely woman named Patricia, who complimented Emma's polite manners. She said please and thank you to the flight attendants. She shared her goldfish crackers with the businessman sitting across the aisle, who told me she was the most delightful travel companion he'd had in years.